like when developer writes a code and then how it reaches to the end user. So whatever the workflow and the processes come in between that, so our team manages those. So basically you can talk about like code bundling, deployment strategy, like building and maintaining the CI/CD pipeline and all. So in the today's talk, I'll be taking you through the Rippling's journey, like how we implemented the synthetic performance monitoring for business applications. But before jumping into the topic, like let's first talk about the performance monitoring only. So there are two types of performance monitoring. One is based on the real user data, so which is also known as RUM, real user metrics, and another one is synthetic performance monitoring. So tools like Google Analytics, Datadog, LogRocket, so all are based on the RUM methodology. So where like once you deploy your code to production, and then like when the end user will start using your web page or web application, and then those particular library or framework will keep sending that data to the store where we can measure and monitor the web performance. But the one limitation I see there is basically the turnaround time. So let's say you shipped some code which is impacting the performance, but you won't get the feedback very fast. Like it might take like 3 to 4 days sometimes in couple of hours you will get to know like the performance keep degrading by the changes you shipped. So what is the solution for that? What if I say like even when you raise the PR, like I'll give you the performance feedback, like whether it will improve the performance of like that particular change, or the PR will improve the performance or decrease the performance, like whatever the performance is already there. So to implement the synthetic performance monitoring, we are using Lighthouse. So I'll talk about like why specifically we chose Lighthouse. And Google's Lighthouse is extremely configurable, but to give but what it is like in Rippling there are 30 different modules, so there are 30 different themes. So instead of configuring it for all the teams, we created a config on top of the Lighthouse config. So I will talk on that as well. And I will also talk about the developers perspective around like how the performance auditing goes on a PR. And let's take a scenario like for example, I want to run the performance auditing on a payroll web page. So for that, what is needed? For that, first I need to create a company. I need to add some employees into that company. So that is known as seeding. So like we'll talk about that as well. So why Lighthouse? First thing is that the Lighthouse is open source, and second thing is like basically the reports it provides like HTML and the JSON reports. So like you can monitor and measure the past performance as well. And to talk about the JSON report of the Lighthouse, if anyone of you have seen that already, so it is very detailed report. Like for example, if your web page is loaded in let's say 1 second, so what the browser was doing at 50 millisecond or 100 millisecond or let's say 200 millisecond, it will give you all those details. And what are the things that I basically need? I need basically emulated like device where I can emulate the device, whether I want to run this auditing on a mobile or a desktop. I also want to have a network simulation where like I would like to test my web page on a let's say slow 4G or a 3G network. So all these things are already there in the Lighthouse. Uh, so if you talk about the Lighthouse report, it has 5 categories. And then categories are also further divided into audits. So what are the 5 categories? One is performance, best practices, SEO, PWA, and accessibility. And let's take a performance category. So in performance category, there are multiple audits. So, but in this talk, we'll talk about the basic 6 web vitals, which are first contentful paint, LCP, time to interactive, cumulative layout shift, these terms only. Because only these 6 audits are used by the Lighthouse to calculate the performance score. So now I'll be talking about the development workflow at Rippling. So in Rippling, we follow single trunk branching methodology. So we have a single trunk branch, so which is expected to be stable, and at any given point of time, you can release it. So now, like if like when I was talking about the turnaround time by using the real user metrics. So let's say if someone has deployed the changes, and if you want to know the performance feedback, then by using the rum you won't get it immediately. So that is why it was absolutely needed to have something which will give the feedback very early, even before deploying it to the production. So let's talk about the configuration. Here I will be talking about the configuration which we build on top of the Lighthouse configuration. So what is the first thing that is needed to build our configuration? What is the most basic thing? The most basic thing is the URL. So for example, here I want to run it for the payroll URL. So I added this URL. What would be the next thing? So the next thing I added here is the change directory. So think about a scenario like in the business web application in which you are working, it has almost like say 3,000, 4,000 URLs. So if you don't want to run all for all the URLs. What I'm saying, like if you raise a PR from the payroll module, then you only want to test the URLs of payroll, not insurance, not HRIS. So these, to avoid these such scenarios, we added this change directory. So now, since it's a business application, so like you cannot access a URL without being authenticated. So for that reason, we need the credentials, right? And the next two things are seeded company type and the timings. So seeded company type. So let's take a scenario like, for an example, there is a company in which 1,000 employees are there. But I also want to do the performance auditing on a company which is in which like there are 10,000 employees or 20,000 of employees. So for the same URL, I can do the testing for 2 different companies, right? And the next part is the timing. So like when I was talking about the performance, so in performance, as I told, there are 6 audits. So those 6 audits can be added into the timings, and you can set the threshold. So for this URL, what I did is basically I added the LCP as a metric, and I set the threshold as 4,000 millisecond or 4 seconds. What does it mean? Like when I'm running my performance auditing of the payroll URL, and while running it, like if I found like basically the largest contentful paint of that particular PR is more than 4 seconds, then break that PR. Will not let it merge to the master. And it is not always necessary that for a given web page, the performance is only impacted by the UI changes. Let's say there is some API which became latent after a given time. So now we also want to, because of that reason, we also want to run the performance auditing on the backend PR as well. Now, like how we can run that? So we basically, to run the E2E test, we also trigger a front end pipeline from the backend PRs. So whenever we trigger, we pass 2 parameters. One is the test tag and another is test set. So by like, for example, in this example, like we are passing payroll and payroll pay steps. So like we'll go through all the configs. Let's say like in our Rippling, we have around like 100 or 150 URLs. So let's say there's a backend PR which we trigger UI pipeline with payroll, these two parameters only. So then based on the config, we'll figure it out, let's say like out of 150 URLs, only there are 10 URLs which are matching with this config. So we'll pick those URL and we do performance auditing only of those 10 URLs only. So now I'll be talking about the different phases of the performance auditing from a developer's perspective. So what happens like when we do synthetic performance monitoring, what we want is like everything has to be like in a controlled environment, like your number of CPU, memory, number of cores, etc. The only variable part should be your code, right? But the network bandwidth is not something very consistent. So what happens like if sometime the network bandwidth goes down, this also reflects your uh, performance score as well. So now we don't want to give a bad user experience by failing the PR, saying like here in this particular PR you are crossing the threshold number. So what we do is like basically we run the Lighthouse audit for each URL 5 times and we pick the median value. But here also the problem is like if you see uh, what if like if the flaky value is the median value. So here if you see like this 5826, the index number 2 value, if that value itself is flaky, then how you will find like which value to be chosen among all these outcome values. So what we do is like we calculate the average and we check whether a particular value is more than 20% of the average value. If that is the case, that means that value is flaky. So what we do, like let's say the median value which we pick, if that is the flaky value, then first we go to the up direction, we check whether that value is flaky or not. If that again is flaky, then we go to the down direction. And again, like if I talk about the JSON report generated by the Lighthouse, that has almost like so many thousands of lines. Now, if you want to compare a JSON report, let's say like I want to know the performance of my dashboard, how it was doing 10 days before and how it is doing currently. So now if I give you very filtered value to be checked upon, then it is very easy because in that Lighthouse JSON report there are so many things and we don't want to like match all those things. So like we pick only the 6 web vitals values and we create our own JSON and we publish it to the S3, right? So let's say like as I was talking, like if you want to compare it with the 7 days back report, then you can get that report from the S3 and you can compare it with any report. So now like let's talk about the execution of a performance auditing. So the one problem which I was talking about earlier, one thing was like let's say in Rippling we have 30 modules and 30 different teams. So we want to keep it separate. We first thing is that we don't want to maintain the separate config for each module, and so we decided to have a single config. Now in the single config we don't want to run all the URLs. You got the point? Like for example, let's say there are total 200 URLs and someone raises a PR. We don't want to run the performance auditing on those 200 URLs because I know like in this PR there will be only specific like 5 to 10 URLs only which will be affected. So I want to run the performance auditing only on those 5 to 10 URLs. So how do we do that? So basically git diff will give you the list of files which are changed in this PR. So for example, I raised a PR in which in the payroll module I changed 2 files. One is file 1 and file 2, and this is a very small list of configs. So here if you see there are only 3 URLs. One is dashboard, another one is insurance, and another one is payroll. So if you match with the change directory, so in the dashboard, it was module slash core, app slash routes, nothing is matches there, so dashboard is removed. Now if you go to the insurance, again nothing is matching with the insurance, we won't pick insurance. If you come to the payroll, okay, so the payroll, the first change directory, which is app slash module slash payroll, so that matches, that file matches with the change directory config. So we'll pick this payroll URL here. Now the problem is, let's say in some of the PRs, if we had to select all all the URLs, let's say for example in Rippling we have more, but let's talk about the 60 URLs, right? So the one limitation with Lighthouse is, like, even if you try to run, if you try to get the Lighthouse report for two URLs simultaneously, it will fail, because only single instance of Lighthouse can be run at a given time. So now if if you want to run it for 60 URLs, then it will take around like 60 to 70 minutes to complete it, which is again like we don't want it. Now, like, let's think about the different scenarios, like how we can run it parallel. So the another thing which comes in mind is web worker. But again, web worker doesn't change anything, because the instance of Lighthouse is going to be one only. So how we solve this problem is using Dockerization. So what we did is, basically we created an image of a, basically, like, you can create a Docker image of node, and what you can do is, like, basically, now I want, you can have 10 different Docker containers, right? So now let's say you have 60 URLs to be tested, and now you have 10 Docker containers. Now you want to group the number of URLs. So by that logic, like, you will group uh, 6 URLs into one Docker container, right? So the first 6 will go to the first Docker container. In the second batch, you will send from 6 to 12, then 13 to 18, like that, right? So now the execution time of doing the performance auditing of 60 URLs is now under 6 or 7 minutes only, which which used to be like around 60 to 70 minutes. So now come to the debugging part. So one good thing is, like, you will get very good insights about the performance in your HTML report. And what we do in the HTML report is, basically, we test it again, like very bad. Like, I'll give you, like, we test it against, like, network simulation of slow 3G network, and, like, like, the browser caches your JS bundles. We remove, like, we don't want to replicate that behavior. We want to replicate the behavior when some new user comes, so how much time it will take for him to load the web page, because once the JS bundles are already cached, then the next time it will be faster. So, and also, like, as you all aware of the uh, bundle analyzer plugin of Webpack, but here you will get the bundle report only for those bundles which are getting downloaded for that particular URL. So let's say, like, in your application there might be more than 100 JS bundles, but for a URL there are only 5 or 10 JS bundles which are getting downloaded. So you can know that also in your HTML Lighthouse HTML report. So, like, let's talk about the developer experience. So as I told, I already talked about, like, how we select the test, which from a like, once a developer raises a PR, we select some URLs to be audited. And so let's take a scenario, like in this example, the PR is raised by a developer. So in that there are 4 URLs which are tested. So the numbers which you see here which are compared with the master. So we also do the performance auditing on master periodically. So what we do is like whenever we are doing the performance auditing on the master pipeline, so that time we keep sending these reports to the S3 bucket, right? So what happens, like when you raise your PR, we do the performance auditing, we have the result. Now we fetch the result which are being pushed, which are already pushed to the S3 bucket, like when we were running it on the master pipeline, and then we compare it. So now if you see it here, like there is no significantly change in the performance on the right hand side PR. But if you see on the left hand side PR, so what we do is like where you might have done some changes, and when I was explaining the config that time, I told like you can also set the timings budget. So here if you see, like for both the URLs, the audit was interactive, and the budget set was 3,000, which means 3 seconds, 3 seconds. But while doing the auditing on your PR, we found out like the audit time for this URL is around 5 seconds, and this is around 6 seconds. And that is how we fail the PRs, by putting a comment on the PR. And again, like we also not want like to improve the developer experience. It is not like you raise the PR and then either you will keep looking into the build, like so what we do is like whenever any failure comes, not only related to the performance auditing, like if it is a TypeScript check which is failing, or E2E test, whatever the test it is failing, we send the Slack notification that you don't have to go back again to the build, because that will handle and will send and will give the exact reasons like why it failed. So basically if you see here, so in the very first Slack notification, there are two performance tests which failed. We give the URL. We also tell that these are the config which was set, and these are the timings which you got. And in the second also, in the second one, there is only one performance audit which got failed. So as like I told, like basically we do run the performance auditing periodically on the master pipeline as well. So whatever data that is being pushed to S3, so we have created a dashboard of that. So like any team can come and see the performance of their URLs here. So on the left hand side, the report, the dashboard which you see is based on the builds. So on which particular build, what was the scores and the reports that were extracted. And the right hand side, the report which you see is basically a graphical representation of all the audits which we have done. And if you see the reports, it's very consistent. Like you won't see like there is any flakiness in any of the audits. So I'll also give the overview of our CI pipeline. So basically, like whenever you raise a PR, so we'll do a couple of code checks, like how old your PR is, like how many commits. We do check like your PR shouldn't be more than 45, 50 commits. We do ESLint TypeScript checks, and we basically build and then deploy your code to some containers. And then what we do once that is deployed, then we select test based on the change file in your PR, and then we batch it. Like the batching I have already discussed. Like we want to, like for example, if in your PR there are 20 URLs which have been selected, so what I'll do to like execute them fast, I'll create 4 batches. I mean like I'll create 4 Docker containers, and I'll put five URLs into each Docker container, so that in the time of execute, the time take in the execution time of 5 URLs, I will be executing 20 URLs, right? So here you see like this is the example of those batches. So seeding data using database snapshot. So we also keep seeding the database for performance test as well as the E2E test. What does mean? Like for example, as like I was talking, like if you want to do the performance testing of a payroll URL, but before that you have to create a company. You need to add employees to that company. So that what we do is basically like we create a database snapshot, right, of like whenever we run this pipeline periodically. And if you see here, like while deploying our web app and also the backend code, what we do is we dump that db snapshot that we created periodically here. So every time when you either run the performance test or E2E test, even if you change the backend state, like the other test won't be affected by that. Yeah, so that's it from my side. Thank you.